every part of comics and artwork is a form of communication with other people. It's not just here, let me direct my thoughts at you as a dictation of concept, but it's hoping to convince you of how cool you think a visual could be or a story could be. And you're trying to communicate ideas in one part storytelling and greater part just graphic impact. You're hoping to relate a sense of energy, urgency, and enthusiasm to people. That there's a lightning of spirit that comes out of superheroes that has always worked for me. That it isn't really about the practicality of what they might do. It's not the practicality about grown men punching each other in costumes. It really isn't about that. It's a visual metaphor. And that metaphor could be for a lot of things, but it's mostly just about the energy and enthusiasm that can be found in the fun of life.
Our report details how advertising through television transforms strangers to your product into acquaintances, and acquaintances into friends, and friends into customers. You could almost say, as a result, that television puts into every living room a selling machine.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's time again for another episode of KineScope, where we look at the early days of live American television. John Suntress here, Gabe Hardman here. Welcome back, William Meyer.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, William.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Gabriel.
It's a really interesting episode. We're talking about the television show You Are There, a very interesting CBS show that started on radio in the late 40s, came to TV in 1950, and became a very important show for very interesting reasons that we're going to discuss today that tie into the Blacklist that affected movies and television, but really directly and obviously basis of our discussion today, television. This was a brave show that took a lot of risks, and we'll get into it. Gabe, initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is just one of those shows where, they basically took a sort of political stand, but did it in a very stealth way that was sort of unimpeachable in some ways, because it's about history. It's about and they're doing, they're going way out of their way to present stuff accurately, but but what they choose to present is in a lot of ways a commentary on the times that they're going through. And the show itself was an odd sort of, odd idea, when Sidney Lumet, who is one of the primary directors on it, or the primary director on it, talks about it. He's like, well, look, this is going to sound silly now, but trust me, it really worked. Where Walter Cronkite, news anchor Walter Cronkite, who was actually not, early days of his career as a TV news anchor, would present these half-hour stories that are historical in nature, and it would, to take you there as the audience, the camera would sort of be the point of view of a reporter, essentially, who was interviewing the characters, the historical characters within the context of this event that's going on. So they would break out of break the fourth wall, talk directly to the camera, directly interact with these in this sort of crazy anachronistic way with contemporary reporters who are talking to them about what's going on. But
it was, and in fact, initially there was a concern of how to present the newsmen. And at first they're like, well, we can't just have them in suits. That's not going to make sense. So let's put them in costumes. They're like, no, that's silly.
Right. Although I think it was still only kind of over their shoulder or something.
Right.
We haven't really I haven't seen any of these episodes.
No.
I don't know if they're seeable at all.
Lumet said that I watched one of his direct episodes or interviews about this. And he said by the fifth episode, they had figured out the conceit of having the actor, there's E.G. Marshall in The Death of Socrates, as Aristophanes, addressing the camera directly. So it was by that fifth episode of the first season that they figured this out. And as you say, I've got a piece of a Cronkite interview that we could play in a little bit of 2 minutes of describing the show, his participation. And yeah, again, CBS News editor, which had already in the radio days established itself as this top flight organization. And it was fun to obviously present these historic facts as news events and put it in that format. And this is an important show from an educational standpoint. Schools and children were encouraged to watch this to understand real history, because they took on real big historic moments, the signing of the Declaration, the death of Socrates. Another thing that we looked at as well was the
Joan of Arc episode.
Joan of Arc
Yes.
case and everything.
But in a way, sorry, William. Let me just finish this one thing though. But in a way, it's what we're presenting sounds like a pretty staid thing, from the news department is this and that, right? But the reality is the people behind it were basically this triumvirate of blacklisted screenwriters, Walter Bernstein, Arnold Manoff, and Abraham Polonsky, who were not able to write the show under their real names. They used multiple fronts, and who would take the name credit for it. And they would, they would churn out the scripts, and it was never entirely clear who, this makes looking, and Kate Nickerson was one of the front names, but this makes actually determining the credits of some of these shows a little bit confusing and murky, because at the time they, even Lumet, who was directing the show, he had no direct connection with with the writers. He couldn't talk to them. It was only through the producer, Charles Russell, who would kind of relay notes and stuff. And but these three guys were basically they were using this as a way to speak out against McCarthyism, as a way to to talk about the ideals that that they held, the ideals for the country, all of this sort of stuff, but do it through this this very stealthy way that that people would have a hard time criticizing. Although if people found out that they were writing for it, it would have ruined the career of the producer. It would have ruined the career of the of the people involved. Other people involved who knew. The producer Charles Russell was not a political guy at all. He was a self-described apolitical guy who, this is so apocryphal sounding, but when he recollected his interaction with these guys, he knew that it was them who was writing it.
Of course.
And when he basically asked them, don't tell me your politics. Just tell me, do you want to overthrow the country or not? Right. And allegedly the response was, no, we want to overthrow CBS. So, which is hilarious, but probably
yes.
Not
But William, give your initial thoughts, and then I'll speak.
Well, to Gabriel's point about the stealth storytelling, I don't know if it was just because the only two I've seen are the Joan of Arc and Socrates, and both of these are about the final hours of persecuted individuals who have a choice to hold firm to what they believe in or to capitulate to the powers that be. So, again, those are the only two I've seen, but that's pretty.
But still,
pretty
it's pretty relevant, and and also the Declaration of Independence one was, it's about struggling with those with the issues of the
rights.
Rights, and about
Freedom
all
to
of that
speak.
stuff, and a struggle as well. They're choosing to confront the stuff about slavery and deal with the things that are not not an easy popular way to present this.
A couple of things we learned from the Lumet interviews, and again, can't stress it enough. Go to the Academy of American Television for their oral history interviews. Unbelievable detail.
But this one in particular, this Lumet one, is great.
Absolutely. And these three writers and Charles Russell and Lumet all worked on the show Danger.
Yes.
Before You Are There. So Russell was very familiar with them and liked their work. And as Lumet describes it, the three writers basically formed a co-op that the three writers would work together. And depending on the volume of work they were able to get, They would help each other with scripts, finish them, given deadlines and things, and help establish these fronts. And like Kate Nickerson wasn't a pseudonym. She was a real person that would walk in and get a check and get taxed on the check by the government. And then they would reimburse her for all the expenses that she had to endure. Then they would have to pay taxes as this writing co-op and everything. So it really was this very intricate, detailed scheme to circumvent this interference by CBS. And Lumet felt that CBS was particularly targeted because of its news staff. And here's some of the reporters. These are the reporters that I believe worked on the Joan of Arc show. Bill Stout, Todd Hunter, Grant Holcomb, and Ned Calmer. And again, Cronkite narrating. But truly, rather not Roger Mudd, 60 Minutes. Mike Wallace.
Yes,
Mike Wallace was on there. Charles Collingwood was on there. All the top newsmen of CBS were part of this show and asking these questions. And apparently they were the real target. And the people that were trying to bring them down were a combination of, there was this guy named, I believe, Anderson, who owned a chain of grocery stores. And he was the one and represented basically middle America of, let's say Jell-O sponsors a show and supports blacklisted actors and writers. I'm no longer going to carry Jell-O in my chain of stores that went all across the East Coast and the Midwest. Well, then it became this storm and a domino effect of the sponsor finding out, they're angry, they contact the network gets angry, and it becomes this big thing. There was a publication called Red Channels that was, and also another group and publication was the American Legion.
And Counter-Strike, right.
Right, and Red Channels would list writers and producers and directors and actors, and if you were in there as suspected communists, then it would be that much tougher to get work.
And of course, there was little or nothing that was actually like, I mean, these were things like, voting for a presidential candidate, going to, going to an event. I mean, like very, and it doesn't fucking matter either, right? Like you could be, you could also just these, you could be communist, you could be a member of the party, these could be your values, and this, and clearly just the way that the question is framed makes it into, is somebody guilty or innocent, when essentially you are a person who, is just a citizen who has different beliefs than the prevailing, sentiment at the time.
This milieu is where we get the phrase, are you now or have you ever been, right?
That's exactly
sure.
Right.
Yeah. But it didn't really, I mean, it wasn't like they, a lot of the ways that they dealt with this stuff were very kind of murky, and it wasn't like there were clear rules or something. People could just get paid off to get off of the, list to some extent. There were, and even, look, I am not going to say a damn thing bad about Sidney Lumet. But in that, even in that interview, he becomes incredibly uncomfortable when talking about this and talking about whether or not he signed a loyalty oath at CBS and whether or not, because it's an uncomfortable, situation and topic and everything. But, he sort of dodges whether he ever signed the loyalty oath. He tells a story about how he, how he had to go and he never got blacklisted, right? And how he had to go and talk to people and stuff. But like, these are all things that are all happening behind closed doors, and, for all of these people. And, so knowing the exact history of all this, and, especially since, you want to present yourself in a good light. Some people could be more incriminated by some of these things. It's just, in retrospect, right? All of it is so murky and difficult to figure out exactly, it's sort of unknowable exactly how a lot of this stuff worked behind the scenes.
Right, because the people that had to go in, and I've got a photo of the CBS executive that was in charge of vetting people. That was Dan O'Shea, and here he is right now. Ironic, leaving CBS in this New York Times article from 55 to get a position at RKO. And Dan was also a studio executive, I believe, for Gone with the Wind producer.
Selznick.
Yeah, David O. Selznick. And and Lumet actually goes into detail of what it was like talking to O'Shea, and some of the questions they asked, and even at the end, he's like, he said it was a friendly conversation, and he said, Dan, why are you doing this? And he said, well, better me than somebody even more evil. Basically, even Dan O'Shea didn't really consider himself a villain in this thing. Catholic guy, the Catholic Church also very tied to the anti-communist movement.
Yeah, I mean, but I think Lumet's point also there, though, is that everybody can delude themselves into thinking that they're not, they're not part of the problem, and that they're somehow the bulwark against things being even worse. And it's a little bit that sort of Lord of the Rings thing. Everybody thinks that with if they have the ring, they're going to do something good with it, right? But the sort of evil behind it corrupts everybody.
No question.
So it's but I also read both him at CBS, but I also read in that oral history of television basically everybody at executives who were the ones who had to deal with this, they basically all said something similar. I'm uncomfortable with this, but if I wasn't doing it, somebody even worse would be doing it.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. In the Socrates play, there are a lot of amazing bit parts.
Yeah.
And for instance, here right away, in the middle there's our friend from Outer Limits, Robert Culp.
And our friend from great independent cinema, John Cassavetes.
That's absolutely right. Yes,
I went to Accidental Genius, the biography of Cassavetes. I couldn't find a specific mention of this show, but he does talk about his love for doing live TV and the freedom that he believed he had as a performer and everything.
Yeah, and
there to the left, you can see Paul Newman, a very young Paul Newman.
Yeah, like I could not even find him.
I struggled for a long time to find a cap.
Yeah, but certainly just to William's point about John Cassavetes, I mean, like live TV, live drama is exactly, speaks to his instincts in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm sure he felt constrained by this as well, because he was just somebody who desperately wanted to do this kind of messy independent work that he made, these very like Shadows, his first film in the late 50s, and all these sort of semi-improvised movies that were very like direct and about characters and humans and stuff. And so much of that is what about people instead of
faces.
Instead of whatever, and so much of that is what we've been talking about, Marty and all these things, that kind of directness of character, even though it's maybe a little bit less apparent in this show, because it has kind of a more of a scheme to it. But you can totally see how that would be Cassavetes' thing.
Once again, here's on the left, Richard Kiley, who we know from Patterns, of course.
Yes.
One of our first program and stuff. And there's Socrates on the right. It's interesting. I couldn't tell you who the actor was who played
Barry
Socrates.
Jones.
Oh, that was Barry Jones.
He played the grieving father in the Borderlands episode of the Outer Limits, which we've all talked about.
Well, William, that absolutely would have snuck away from
Awesome.
me.
Yeah, I didn't get that either. Good job.
And he also
go ahead, please.
He also played John Milton in this very program, but I haven't seen that one, but I would really like to.
Yeah. I honestly, as you guys know, the only things I found on YouTube were Socrates and for complete shows.
Yeah,
Socrates and not Joan of Arc, the Declaration of Independence.
Yes,
I even grabbed screen caps from the Declaration of Independence, but I did for Joan of Arc, which I found on the Internet Archive. And there's Dina Lund, I believe, is her name, and she made a handful of movies. Ironically, the romantic lead in the very first Martin and Lewis film, My Friend Irma, based on the radio play, and also My Friend Irma Goes West, their second film, but also another one of their films. I want to say What's the Worst That Could Happen? And another vehicle for Martin and Lewis. But no, she, she was this is around that same time, maybe a year or two before, where she was in My Friend Irma, that she's playing Joan of Arc.
She has a slew of live TV credits. Including the Lux Video Theater, Ford Television, General Electric, DuPont, and Schlitz Playhouse, which I didn't even know. Got to crack one open for Schlitz.
Liquor Bowl, yeah.
And the Joseph Cotton Show, which I think is cool. I really liked her in this performance. Did all of us see the Joan of Arc one?
Yeah.
I just, being a lifelong Joan of Arc enthusiast, I was happy to see it pop up when John brought it up, and I liked the staging and everything. And one of the things about both the programs, the Socrates and the Joan of Arc one, I thought was interesting, is we talk about the reporter who's sort of like an interloper from the modern era in the past, but they never speak directly to the subject. They talk to their like friends and enemies and sort of get sort of this, this sort of
periphery.
And I thought that was really interesting because it kind of sets apart, the person being interrogated. They're sort of at arm's length.
And the whole show is about contextualizing these things, right? It's about making it something that is relatable to the present, right? So, I mean, that makes sense.
I'm going to play the Cronkite piece. It's about 2 minutes long.
Sounds good. Yeah.
But here's Cronkite from an NPR interview, or I should say an NPR report, because he's really just describing the You Are There experience.
You Are There also had a less visible problem, one so potentially dangerous that many, including myself, were not permitted to know about it. It was the Blacklist. The reassuring thing about a hot war is that you know where the bullets are coming from. But the Cold War offered no such clarity, especially when politics became a barometer of loyalty. Blacklisting was television's way of fighting a contest of ideas, not bullets. The Blacklist was as secret and covert as the subversives had imagined itself to be fighting. It assumed that communism was an intellectual contagion, and that it could infect Americans through television if the medium were not properly screened for subversive ideas. It kept many talented people from working without ever telling them why. In presenting the complexities of history on You Are There, Charlie Russell, our producer, was not willing to play the blacklist game or concern himself with the politics of his talent. When the 3 most literate New York writers available for the series turned out to be blacklisted, he secretly hired them. For the first 2 seasons, virtually every You Are There script was written by either Walter Bernstein, Arnold Manoff, or Abraham Polanski, none of whom I ever knew or was permitted to meet. You Are There never treated the blacklist directly, of course, or the larger issue of McCarthyism, and nobody believed it should, but history was rich with striking parallels. It offered no shortage of ways to deal obliquely with matters of dissent and intellectual freedom. In our first 6 months alone, we tackled Joan of Arc, the Salem witch trials, the Magna Carta, and the Dreyfus case.
399 B.C., the death of Socrates. You are there.
But ironically, the farther back into history we went, the more contemporary the parallels became.
So there you go.
Cool.
It was great to hear him talk about that. And again, isn't it interesting how Russell compartmentalized the writers to really protect the other people so that, God forbid, they should be interrogated. I don't know. I've never met Kate.
Right. Yeah. Although also it's a little bit about protecting himself too. Like it would ruin everybody involved if anybody who knew. So, like keeping them away helps him as well. Not a criticism. That's smart. But go ahead.
Do you gentlemen know, was it pretty much an open secret, or was it really not?
No. Like Lumet didn't know until quite a ways in that who was actually writing these scripts, and then when after he knew, he said that he started to like pick up on just the style of who wrote what, the kind of just elegant writing of Abraham Polanski or whatever,
because they had worked with them on Danger for a couple of years prior to You Were There. This was the same group.
But I mean, I don't think that I think it was a similar setup on Danger though, right? Like they didn't know they were working with them, right? Or did they?
No, it was. I think really things intensified during the You Are There period. As I understood Lumet's description of all of this. I could be wrong, but
I think that I believe that they were already blacklisted in that, because I don't think that they came to do. They all had other careers, right? And Abraham Polanski was a screenwriter. He wrote Body and Soul and the boxing movie, and he wrote and directed Force of Evil, and it was the blacklisting in, as I understand it, it was the blacklisting in Hollywood in the features that kind of brought him to New York, and then put him in this position where they started trying to write, all of them were writing television that way. But although, it was basically just movies and television that were affected by this. Publishing and Broadway were never affected by it.
That's correct.
The blacklist. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I read today that that particular writer, even like some 40 years after or so, would still not name the scripts that he had done under various names.
Are you saying Polanski?
Polanski?
Yeah,
maybe. But although, I have this book of his screenplays for it, so clearly some of them he did. It is still a little. It is unclear exactly who's responsible for what. It's also weirdly unclear which ones Lumet directed, because their credit was. I don't know why that would be so unclear, but maybe it's just that he talks about ones that he didn't necessarily direct frequently in the interviews. He talks about the Joan of Arc one, which is not credited to him, and he talks about the Declaration of Independence one in a different clip from American Masters or something, and. Which is also one that's either not credited him or doesn't have a credit. I don't know.
Well, as he said, I'm sorry, please continue.
No, and I think that maybe the Joan of Arc one is credited to Polanski, but I'm not sure that he,
right.
And
on
IMDb it is, but
under the Kate Nickerson,
or
front.
Right.
Lumet said, because for a while he did both shows, and as Russell produced both shows, Danger and You Are There. And he said when you had two half-hour shows in the same week, he said you really had 8 shows in your head, because you had not only the shows that were airing, but you were casting the show that was going to air the following week. You were building sets and everything for 2 weeks in advance, and you were writing this or looking over the scripts for 3 weeks in advance. So it really was keeping 4 shows in your head. And he said finally one had to give. He gave up Danger to continue on You Are There because it was a more prestige show. Right. And also he went on to do other work for both networks, NBC and CBS. So.
And kind of the way that people ended up directing television at the times, they would sort of rise up through the ranks of being an assistant director. The assistant directors were basically in control of whatever camera was not on at the moment. So they would be lining up the next shot and helping to arrange that. While whatever was on camera was on camera, and that led him into directing this stuff. But the first AD on You Are There for most of it was, for a lot of it anyway, was John Frankenheimer, who then went on to obviously direct Manchurian Candidate later, but also The Comedian that we looked at,
right?
And some of the best later live TV episodes.
And in fact, Lumet was an assistant to Yul Brynner, the fine actor, The King and I, and
he's who brought him in. He's the story tells us nobody over here knows what they're doing, but you can make money.
Yeah, and again, Lumet had come from theater, so he clearly was a capable director. And really, again, that Lumet, that American Masters PBS documentary is fantastic for a 2-hour thing. The American Television Oral History Lumet interview is even greater because he really gets much more into detail how he got into television, the mechanics of learning how to direct and everything, the differences between the two networks in terms of camera shot philosophy. Really, really interesting stuff. And great. And again, this man was a genius. He wrote his Making Movies book and so many great films to come later in his career and everything. But again, at this You Are There blacklist point, this could have cost him his career. And a lot of these people did willingly go to people like Dan O'Shea and give them whatever information they could because they wanted to keep their jobs. I mean, he never went into naming names or anything like that. And again, thankfully, being protected by Russell, wouldn't be able to give him Polanski and company. So, It was again. I mean, that's why. I mean, these especially the Socrates episode. That to me was the most effective.
Yes,
and also what a cast as well.
Yeah,
I forget.
Amazing.
I forget this guy's name here in the center. This character actor, Henry something, I believe, and I'm going to look up on the cast to see if I can find his name. But he's a familiar face that you've seen a million times in various TV shows over the years.
One thing that struck me about the Death of Socrates episode was the blocking of the actors many times seemed to me to be reflective of classical paintings, where you would have like a frozen tableau of everyone arranged, and in particular there would be characters closer to the camera with their faces turned and kind of like an oblique angle. And I don't know if it was specific paintings, but it did remind me of very much of that kind of blocking.
Yeah, and another, which is a very good point, actually. But another of the guys in that photo that you just showed, the guy off to the right, Creto, I think, on frame right. He was a guy that I'm like, where do I know that guy from? And he's also in the Declaration of Independence one. And I looked it up, and he's
Joseph Anthony is his name.
Right. Oh, is it?
Yep. That's who's Creto.
Okay, well, maybe I have the wrong things, but whichever. The guy in the on the top right of frame is he's in this movie called The Reckless Moment that I just watched. It's a Max Ophuls noir movie from around the same time, maybe like a year or two earlier, and he's just one of those actors that you kind of see around in small parts and stuff. But but he seemed to get a lot of work on this show.
Yeah, here I'm confirming. I want to see if that is him. You said a Reckless.
I mean, I think it's Shepard Strudwick, but
that's a different actor, and I will bring you who he was in Socrates in a second. No,
that's how he's listed on IMDb. Yeah,
that's interesting. Both guys are listed as Creto,
but I think the IMDb. I don't think we can be going by very, credibly by the IMDb on this. I mean, that is the actor I'm talking about, and he is in that other movie. I'm not exactly sure who he plays in the thing because I think that like two people are credited as Plato as well. I mean, it's crazy,
including Paul Newman.
Yeah, exactly.
Full accounts, and it's like no, it was Cassavetes.
Yeah, and I mean, again, obviously. Yeah, obviously there's not great credits for this, and everybody isn't spending all their time figuring it out on IMDb, which are often wrong about things anyway. So
ironically, too, and I'm so bummed that the film doesn't exist, but according to Lumet, they did The Death of Jesse James, and James Dean played Bob Howard in that production.
That'd be nice to see.
Robert.
Robert Ford. Right,
Robert Ford.
Pardon me, Robert Ford.
Or Mo Howard, or Larry Fine.
He played Mo Howard
and Larry Fine alternately.
The Three Stooges in orbit. Well, at least IMDb has him listed as both.
Yeah, that's what IMDb says. Yes. Look, I know this IMDb thing is a problem because I have credits on my IMDb page that are wrong, and you can write to them forever, and they will never change it. So they're the worst.
That's hilarious.
Anybody can put a credit on there, and then you're stuck with it because they'll never change it.
I really was excited to find this O'Shea picture, though. And there's, Jim Aubrey was the smiling cobra, but look at this guy.
Yeah.
And this is the guy that could really cost you your job at CBS.
Right.
And, again, and it was interesting and true. And again, Lumet and all the accounts I've read of William Paley, the chairman of CBS, his friendship with Ed Murrow. Lumet wasn't even certain if Paley, as much as the CBS News staff was the target for a lot of these communist attacks, to the point where they drove one of the CBS anchors, Don Hollenbeck, to suicide. I mean, this was really relentless shit. And a lot of great newsmen really had to go to the mat to clear their names. And Charles Collingwood was another guy that fought a lot of anti-communist things. But either, as Lumet said, to please Ed Murrow, because Ed Murrow had the strength. I really hope we'll do a KineScope about Murrow, maybe either person to person or See It Now, his news show. But regardless, Murrow really did have power, and Paley was a friend of his going back to the war days where they really bonded. And Murrow really was in charge of CBS News. And, even before he made his direct attack on Joe McCarthy, there really was this feeling of don't you dare touch my news staff. And either Paley just acquiesced because he was Murrow's friend, or for a long time he shared that same spirit of, yeah, you're not going to screw with my guys, and I'm standing by my guys. And it's kind of cool. Again, there were still nervous moments. I love Good Night and Good Luck. I think it's a great movie that does a great job on that. I also love the HBO biopic about Murrow that Daniel Travanti did as Ed Murrow. I think both are really good, interesting things. And I've read many Ed Murrow biographies as well. So, and I think very inadvertently, he's part of this picture as well.
And, speaking of that, the Murrow show where he stands up to McCarthy, You Are There, they went out of their way to deliberately do the episode about Galileo that that would run right around that time.
Yes.
All this. Polanski is quoted as saying that they're basically waging a kind of guerrilla war against McCarthyism through this show by like the subjects that they chose and the way that they tried to use them to comment on what was going on at the moment.
Absolutely.
That does show, though, sadly, how, it's a plug and play methodology, whether it's communism or something else. You know what I mean? Historically.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, just the fervor that can be, stirred up in people for something that they don't understand or necessarily actually care about, like, vaccines.
Hey, 100%. Good Lord, yes.
Yeah.
And really, again, another show we should explore regarding the Blacklist is the Goldbergs, the kind of drama comedy that Gertrude Berg created. Her main co-star, Philip Loeb, who played her husband on the show, was another actor that was persecuted by the Blacklist, who ultimately killed himself. That's the thing, man. There were real career-ending moments. My good acquaintance, Bud Schulberg, who I got to know in his later years, was a Hollywood screenwriter that was forced to testify to HUAC, was genuinely, as at least he explained to me in conversation, afraid of the Red Scare, was a collaborator with Elia Kazan, was compelled to name names, and is one of those guys that, certainly, like Kazan himself, was kind of shunned by several circles of Hollywood and stuff because of his cooperation. But again, I honestly can't say, and I consider myself a pretty hardcore First Amendment right liberal, but when your livelihood is being threatened and your career could end, there were people like Dalton Trumbull that were willing to suspend their career, or not willing, but obviously went to jail and on their principles and stuff, wouldn't name names, and it cost them several years of their career and death threats and other things. That Trumbo movie is with Brian.
Not very good, but yeah, but
I think it's a good. He got a few nominations, but that's fine.
Because there's nothing like Oscars to tell you what's good.
Sure.
I think that to that point, it is difficult. I entirely sympathize with the people who are blacklisted, but it's also I'd be full of shit to say that I wasn't. We're all talking about this from a very safe remove. In theory, or at least a safe remove from this particular period and the incidents there, 100%. Not necessarily the one we're going through right now. But I think that it would be pretty smug and hypocritical to act like we all know how we would have dealt with these things.
Was Trumbo? Did he do? Forgive me if I'm getting this wrong. Did he do Roman Holiday and they added him back in later in the credits sequence? Is that? Am I mixing up?
I don't remember about that, but certainly Spartacus and.
That was post, but pre. I'm trying to remember because
I wonder which movie I'm thinking of.
I thought he got credit for Roman Holiday.
I remember seeing a restoration where they put his name back in, and I'm just blanking which film it was, but it was after a 50th anniversary restoration or something. Like, now we can admit that he wrote the damn movie.
Well, and as Gabe was saying, Socrates was the risk that producer Kurt Russell was able to say, no, this guy wrote it, and he's like, we're putting his name up. This was 1960.
Spartacus.
Yes, in the case of Spartacus. And also at the time, Otto Preminger wanted him for Exodus.
Yes.
As well. So, but Spartacus was first. But no, I mean, and truly, as I learned after in the 90s, HUAC's hearings moved from Washington to Chicago and continued well into the 60s. So that was a real, I mean, even though McCarthy was taken down during the Army McCarthy hearings, and you have that wonderful piece of news of real footage of Joseph Welch, the judge, saying, "That's enough, Senator. Have you no sense of decency at long last?" Who, by the way, Joseph Welch in Anatomy of Murder playing a judge.
Right. Yeah.
But
so Preminger, yeah.
Yes, that's right. A Preminger film, absolutely. But that's, I mean, that's the thing is we think of McCarthyism and the Red Scare and the Blacklist ending with people like Murrow taking McCarthy down on See It Now, his news show. But in reality, no, it really did take several years afterwards.
Yeah, and
it finally went away.
To Williams' Dalton Trumbo point, he's correct that it was originally uncredited for Roman Holiday and then restored later. I mean, but other things that I mean, Dalton Trumbo didn't work on this TV show we're talking about, but but just as a blacklisted writer, he also a couple movies, The Prowler, this movie that Joseph Losey directed, and Gun Crazy, Joseph H. Lewis directed movie. These are kind of great seminal noir movies that he wrote without getting credit initially, and I just highly recommend both of those movies.
Well, and that's why, I mean, Gabe, I respect your opinion that you didn't like Trumbo, but I thought they did an interesting job showing a lot of the movies that like the King brothers made from the 50s that were not even B movies. These were Z movies and stuff. And Trumbo would write these scripts and submit them, and also was part of another co-op of writers that would, provide scripts for Hollywood under assumed names or no credit at all.
It's absolutely an interesting story. Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story. And as a lot of these are, I mean, so we also took a look at the front, the 1976 movie directed by Martin Ritt and written by Walter Bernstein, one of the, triumvirate of You Are There writers. And it's, which is a pretty damn interesting movie, if a little bit on the unbelievable wish fulfillment side at the end. This movie was not, it was not made by Woody Allen, but he starred in it, and it's, and he plays the kind of, the guy who's just a friend of one of the blacklisted writers who ends up being a front for this, group of three guys who are basically represent, Bernstein and Manoff and Polanski, and and it kind of deals with the complexity of how, like him trying to pass himself off as the writer, and and how the Allen character gets drawn into, to having to confront all these same issues that the blacklisted writers did. And like I say, the ending of it is such incredible wish fulfillment about the way that I'm sure that everybody wishes they could have dealt with all of this stuff, but it's also thrilling, right? Like, it's hard not to love it. I mean, he goes in front of this, into the meeting, the sort of tribunal thing, where he's expected to name names, and he basically just gets up and goes, and he has had no real spine and no values throughout this entire thing. Gets up and it's like, I disagree with, with the, what you're doing here. And also you can all go fuck yourselves. And that's the end of it. He gets taken off to prison, the end of the movie. It's great. It's great.
I want to say it was the 90s, Guilt by Suspicion is a Irving
Guilty by Suspicion. Yeah, it's like 90 or 91, I think.
Yeah, and it's Irving Winkler, I want to say, was the producer.
Yeah, Irwin Winkler. Yeah, he had produced Raging Bull and Goodfellas
and Rocky,
and worked with Scorsese a lot. Yeah.
Yes, and De Niro plays a similar character. Well, No, I shouldn't say similar. In the front, Woody Allen is a front for these writers. De Niro is a filmmaker that is hounded on the Hollywood side by the Blacklist, and essentially it's another De Niro. Oh, you're gonna tell me. You're gonna tell me. I mean, and it's again wish fulfillment moment. And yeah, it would have been great to have a De Niro, do all that stuff. And some of them did leave screaming and still of the Hollywood 10 and wouldn't take the bullshit of the Un-American Activities Committee and stuff.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that nobody stood up to them. I'm just saying like that presenting it the way that it does in the movie is definitely a kind of, it's just to go to have that sort of release of, oh my God, somebody just said the thing that everybody feels about it.
And in the front, you find out that a lot of people, both in front of the camera, the actors, and behind the camera, are all blacklisted people. Yeah. So Herschel Bernardi is in there as one of the actors. He was blacklisted.
Right.
What's his face from Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and the producers.
Zero Mostel,
of course.
Yeah.
Brain. Third show today, everybody. You'll forgive me for knowing names. But yeah, Mostel was blacklisted, and so many others as well. And so it really, it's. I think it's a great movie. It's on Amazon Prime right now. If you're curious to watch the front.
And also Martin Ritt was at the time, involved in all this stuff. He was blacklisted. He and Walter Bernstein were very close friends. So all these people were deeply involved in all this stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, there you go. We've solved the blacklist.
Yeah, we have not even scratched the surface of the blacklist, but it's an enormous topic. None of us are experts, but it's so directly related to this show, and I just think that it's such an interesting thing that that they would approach the problems that I disagree that this is analogous to cancel culture, but the way that Bernstein and Manoff and Polanski would, took what's the worst thing that could happen to them in their careers and turn it around and make it something where they could still express themselves and still talk about the issues that they think are important.
How do you not think, and I'm just asking from a discussion standpoint, how is this not similar to cancel culture?
Well, I don't think that I don't think that this is like that. We could have a whole show about this, but and I think that the context of what we're talking about is not. I mean, is cancel culture something that's driven by government and institutions, and I'm not going to argue about this. I don't really know.
You'll forgive me.
William will get uncomfortable. He's our guest, and we should not be mean in front of him.
I will take a minute and say that there is a similarity, and that there were people in government that fostered cancel culture in the same way that the anti-communist one was fortified by people in government. And I will say that it is a social commentary without getting into the granular subtle differences between.
Yeah, exactly. Don't get into subtlety that we can just paint everything with a big broad brush.
Much like what they were dealing with on You Are There, they were able to take a metaphor of what was happening at the moment, put it in their fiction, and it did impact the fiction of the moment. And I do think cancel culture is impacting the fiction of the moment. So it's okay.
Well, I'm not saying that that's not true. Of course, that's true. Any broad cultural thing is going to affect what people express in the moment, good or bad, whatever, I mean, but I don't think that, I don't think that it is an institutionalized thing that is targeting particular people the way that the Blacklist did.
I would agree with you at the moment. I would say that in the previous presidential administration, it was.
I think that talking about cancel culture is something that's so nebulous compared to talking about a specific thing, which was the Blacklist. Like it was a specific thing where specific groups of people in particular trades were targeted to, in terms that we can, nail down, as opposed to this big vague idea of cancel culture that I don't think is I don't think is an appropriate way to frame a whole bunch of shit that's going on culturally that doesn't, that is not all negative. I don't think there is a positive to the blacklist. I don't think that there's, I don't think that there was like, hey, but these people were, were doing good by getting rid of some of those communists. I think that this is a, this is something that's much, it's much bigger and more difficult. And I just apologize to William. He's a guest in our house, and we're fighting like this in front of him. It's terrible.
But it's the discussion, and truly, I'm glad that we are talking about this. And William, if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But again, I think that from the broad standpoint of not knowing how to, like, what does it mean when you are accusing me of being a communist? And there's a laundry list of things that they would just apply. I do think that sometimes cancel culture can get out of control. Well, and there is an initial, let me finish. All I'm saying is that there is sometimes that initial accusation that is analogous to the Red Scare. That's what I'm saying.
I'm disagreeing with the premise that cancel culture is a singular thing, and the way that the blacklist is, and and as as Ed points out in the comments, this is that was very much driven by institutions of government, and there were with the FBI and people to back this stuff up, and a general sense that there are, that people get canceled, to the extent that really even happens, which is, debatable compared to, to the very serious specifics of the blacklist. I just don't think that they are comparable things, is what I'm saying. And I don't even know that you can put, put cancel culture into this clear box the way that it's.
I agree with that. I do agree with that. Go ahead, William.
Well, I was just going to basically state the same thing, just for the record. The three of us here can agree what the blacklist is or was, but I don't think the three of us could actually come to an agreement on cancel culture per se, because its power is in its slipperiness.
Yes.
And the blacklist is a historical moment.
I agree with that as well.
Yeah.
And maybe not using the phrase cancel culture is correct, but I do think in terms of the culture wars and the attacks on both sides sometimes can find itself slippery.
The attacks on both sides are slippery is as broad a statement as you could possibly make about just culture in general and the way things go, as opposed to something where, we have these very clear things that were, that levers of government were used to enforce, and there were very, very specific, there was very specific fallout for people, and they were, and they were denied jobs in a structural way that is not the case with, in the terms that people use for cancel culture.
No.
Anyway,
I like it. I like it.
Okay, so I guess we're basically done though. But
we burn our side.
No, it's good stuff. So what's John? What are we going to cover next week? Assuming we're still talking to each other next week.
We'll be talking next week. Well, honestly, Gabe, we're
gonna look at the defenders, right?
I was gonna say, although who did I talk to? Mark DeMatteis might be interested in talking about the defender as well, but to accommodate him because he's on the East Coast and is asleep.
Okay, yeah.
But either way, he wouldn't.
Well, I have no problem with rescheduling the stuff. We should just figure out what we're going to talk about.
Yeah,
but,
we could lighten things up again with Ernie Kovacs and look at Ernie Kovacs.
We could definitely do that. I believe next. I'm telling John this in the show, but next week I can't do Thursday, so we'll be doing it another day anyway. So it may make sense to reschedule with him.
I will see what Mark's. It might be a Sunday afternoon or something. I don't know.
That could still be okay. This is a production meeting, so if the we'll announce on social media what we're talking about next week once we figured it out. Which we should have done our jobs before we started and figured all this out. But
I was late.
Behind the scenes, I was late. We were all late. Okay, it was
truly.
Can I close on just one thing about the Joan of Arc episode, because I said it privately and I'll say it publicly. There is a shot in this episode that I just think is exemplary, where they leave Joan in her cell and she's alone and she's sort of cowering on bended knee, and in the foreground of the shot is a candle. And they must have someone just off frame blowing on this candle, because it starts small and then it grows large and starts flickering over Joan, who's in the background of the shot. And I just thought it was such... I liked it.
I'll bring it up in a second.
Nice, beautiful stuff. And the funny thing about this is that I listened to the Lumet interview, and he talked at length about this Joan of Arc episode, right? Which seemingly he did not direct. But but when I was watching it, I was under the impression that he did direct it, because one of the things that he, in that interview, one of the movies that he lists as like a big awakening for him, just as a filmmaker, was Carl Dreyer's The Passion of Joan of Arc, which is which is a movie that's very much about telling it through visuals and telling it through very specific, close shots. It's very much an art movie, right? Dutch, Danish, I can't remember where it's from.
Yeah.
So I was watching it thinking, oh, I can see where he was bringing in some of these influences, but apparently he wasn't at all, because he didn't direct the thing. But whatever, I don't know.
But funny stuff. And yeah, he talks about, I guess, the smoke got so bad at that point because of that, that literally, Cronkite was choking and all that. Although, again, I mentioned I saw that in the presentation that we saw.
Yeah, it didn't feel like that in the, but maybe just on stage it felt like that more than, and they were probably trying to cut around it at the time. So
Could very well be.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, look forward to another bout between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder next week, as those are heavyweights, by the way.
Are you talking about boxing, John?
Yeah, I am talking about boxing. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion about the Blacklist and about You Are There. I recommend you watch The Death of Socrates on YouTube or on archive.org. You catch the Joan of Arc episode. Both are incredible. I felt the Declaration of Independence a little dry in comparison.
They all could lean a little towards dry, but it's all very interesting contextually, and
Absolutely.
It's a really good thing to talk about anyway.
Indeed. So join us next time for KineScope, and until then, adjust your rabbit ears and get better
reception.
Reception?
Yeah.
And perception and the whole goddamn thing, whatever you want.
All right. I screwed the pooch. Take care, everybody. We'll talk next. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Our report details how advertising through television transforms strangers to your product into acquaintances, and acquaintances into friends, and friends into customers. You could almost say, as a result, that television puts into every living room a selling machine.